Once upon a time, King Zaza was a monarch of immense wealth and influence, with a reputation that drew the attention of kings and queens from far and wide. His riches were legendary, and his kingdom was said to be a land of opulence and grandeur. As a result, many royal families saw an alliance with him as a way to secure their power and prosperity. Despite his wealth, King Zaza had no heir to succeed him. His 11 wives had given birth to numerous daughters, but not a single son. The land was also suffering from a lack of rain. A prophecy revealed that it would never rain in the land until an heir is born to the king. The king's frustration grew with each passing day, as he felt the weight of his kingdom's future on his shoulders. But fortune finally smiled upon King Ashura when his 9th wife, Queen Zara, became pregnant and gave birth to a son. The palace erupted in joy, and the king's heart swelled with pride. However, not all of his wives shared in the celebration. Some were consumed by jealousy, feeling threatened by the new heir. As was customary, the young prince was taken to the shrine for a ritual to prepare him for his future role as king. The chief priest placed the bead of power around the prince's neck, but instead of the expected blessing, the prince screamed and fainted. The priest, confused and concerned, inquired of the gods what was happening. The shocking revelation was that the prince was not King Zaza's son. The queen was summoned to the palace to confess who the biological father was. Queen Zara, trembling with fear, revealed the truth. She had been visiting the king of the neighboring empire and was the real father of the prince. The king's world came crashing down around him as he realized his wife's betrayal and the implications it had on his kingdom's future. The king's advisors and chiefs gathered around him, urging him to take action against Queen Zara and the neighboring king. But King Zaza, heartbroken and defeated, knew not what to do. His kingdom's fate hung in the balance, and he could only wonder what the future held. The incident of the 9th wife sent shockwaves through the palace, revealing long-hidden secrets that had been concealed behind closed doors. It was discovered that a staggering 90% of the princesses were, in fact, bastards, sired by various men, including chiefs, guards, neighboring kings, and others. The desperation to produce a male heir had driven the women to seek out any means necessary, regardless of the consequences. The king, upon learning of this deceit, was consumed by rage and disappointment. He promptly banished the wives and children affected by the scandal from the palace, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The king's own mental state began to unravel, and he became withdrawn and isolated. His usual coping mechanism, hunting, became an increasingly frequent escape. On one such hunting trip, the king, seeking solitude, ventured into the forest without his guard. As he wandered deeper into the woods, he stumbled upon a mesmerizing singing duo, a beautiful girl and a boy. Their enchanting voices, however, were not welcomed in their community, where they were treated as outcasts due to their mother's affliction with a disfiguring and incurable disease. Shunned by their people, they had grown accustomed to seeking solace in the forest, singing to the trees. The king, entranced by their melodies, requested that they sing for him. Oblivious to his royal status, they happily obliged, and their music brought a measure of peace to the troubled monarch. The king, desperate for a distraction from his woes, implored them to return and sing for him regularly. As the days passed, the singing duo became a regular fixture in the king's life, providing a fleeting respite from the turmoil that had engulfed the palace. Their music, a balm to the king's battered soul, helped to soothe his frayed nerves, even as the secrets and scandals continued to simmer just below the surface. One day, the king called the duo and asked where they lived, saying he would love to visit them. They joyfully told him the community they were from. They were overjoyed because nobody had visited them for years, and no one associated with them. When they arrived home, the duo told their mother about their encounter with the hunter they met in the forest and how he promised to visit them someday, and she was glad to see her children happy. One fateful day, the king, dressed in royal attire, came to the community where the duo lived. He went to the community King Zuru's palace and was joyfully welcomed. The king asked him what brought him to his kingdom, and he told him he came to visit a duo who were singers. King Zuru asked King Zaza what was so special about the duo that he left his kingdom to visit them instead of ordering them to his palace. King Zaza narrated how their presence always made him feel at ease. King Zuru sent for all the best singers in his community, but was shocked when he was told the duo were not among them. A guard then told King Zuru of a twin who usually sang in the forest and lived at the outskirts of the community. The king sent to fetch them. When they arrived, they were scared and shaken. They couldn't recognize the hunter because he was dressed in royal apparel. The hunter never knew they were twins. He thought they were lovers because they weren't identical. They greeted both kings, and King Zaza asked why he hadn't seen them in the forest for days. Immediately, they recognized him and were amazed. They never knew they had been relating to a king all along. They only agreed to sing for him because they were happy that someone recognized them and was pleased to associate with them. The twins told the king that their mother's sickness had grown worse, and they couldn't leave her alone at home. On hearing that their mother was sick, King Zaza stood up, thanked King Zuru for his hospitality, and followed the duo to their home. He told them to enter the cart that brought him, but they were afraid because, all their lives, they had never ridden a bicycle, not to mention a cart. They became the center of attention to the villagers. Even King Zuru and everyone in the palace were still wondering what was happening. The duo's house was an uncompleted building covered with bamboo sticks and a palm front at the outskirts of the village. Whenever it rained heavily, they wouldn't be able to sleep as their house would be flooded with water. They always prayed for a dry season and were always sad when the rainy season came. When they got to their home, Zita and Zanga, the duo, ran inside to get a seat for the king because their house wasn't fit for a man of his status to enter. But before they would come out, the king was already inside. Immediately, the duo saw the king. They stood still, shocked. The king sat on a wooden seat close to their sick mother. The whole house was stinking because their mother was already decaying alive. She was dying. She didn't even notice the presence of the king because she was lifeless. The king immediately stood up and came outside the house, and the twins were afraid. They ran after the king, but when they got outside, they heard the king commanding his guard to bring the woman along with them. She was taken to the hospital, but the hospital couldn't do anything. The sickness was a strange one. They had never seen such a sickness before. So, she was taken to the village traditionalist for treatment. The duo was taken to the palace, and for the first time in their lives, they entered a beautiful mansion. Everyone in the palace was surprised to see what those dirty-looking things were doing with the king. Everyone was asking questions without anyone knowing what was going on. They were shown to their room. The duo entered their room, saw how furnished it was, especially the bed, and fell to the ground, laughing and crying at the same time. Everything was happening so fast, they felt as if they were dreaming. They had never slept on a bed since they were born. They slept on a mat. The twins went before the king, prostrated, thanked, and prayed for him and his family. They began to sing and dance. The king was so delighted that he summoned drummers to play for the twins. Everyone at the palace began to dance, and the atmosphere was filled with joy. Nobody had seen the king this happy for years. All of a sudden, a bright light, so bright that no man could behold, shone at the palace, and a strange wind began to blow. Immediately, The land, which had lacked rain for months, experienced great rain. Everyone was shouting for joy, but the king wasn't feeling comfortable. "I need to seek answers to know what just happened," he said to himself. The duo's mother was discharged from the traditional home and brought to the palace. As the duo's mother stepped into the living room, her children rushed to welcome her, their faces beaming with excitement. But to their surprise, their mother's expression was far from joyful. Her eyes seemed distant, her brow furrowed in concern, and her step slow and deliberate, as if she was trying to recall a forgotten memory. She held her head with both hands, her fingers digging deep into her hair, as if trying to hold it in place, fearing it might fall off at any moment. The children's excitement quickly turned to worry as they watched their mother's strange behavior. Before they could react, she suddenly collapsed to the ground, her body limp and lifeless. The children panicked, calling out to the servants for help. They quickly poured water on their mother's face, trying to revive her. After what seemed like an eternity, she slowly began to stir, her eyes fluttering open. The children breathed a sigh of relief as they helped their mother into their room, laying her down on their bed, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. The woman's memories came flooding back, and when the king entered the room, she called him by a name that only his best friend, who later became the love of his life, knew. The king was taken aback, asking her how she had come to know that name. The woman smiled, her eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief, and replied that she would tell him everything when the time was right. The king was both intrigued and troubled by the woman's words. He couldn't shake off the feeling that she knew more about him than he was comfortable with. The duo's mother told the king that she would love to share a story publicly. Despite his reservations, he agreed to her request to share her story publicly, and everyone in the kingdom was summoned to gather at the palace. The air was thick with anticipation as people wondered what this mysterious woman had to say. On the day of the gathering, the king addressed the crowd, his voice booming across the courtyard. He introduced the woman, who stood before them with a quiet confidence. She began to tell her story, taking them back 31 years to a time when a young prince had fallen deeply in love with a woman who was not of royal blood. The prince's parents had refused to accept the woman, insisting that their son marry a princess of royal lineage. But the prince was resolute, refusing to give up on the woman he loved. After much persuasion, his parents relented, agreeing to allow him to marry his beloved after he had fulfilled his royal duties and married the princess they had chosen for him. The prince agreed, and immediately after his coronation, he married the love of his life. The two women, the princess and the prince's beloved, lived together in harmony, sharing secrets and supporting each other. But fate had other plans. When the second wife became pregnant, she traveled to her hometown to share the news with her parents, but her journey was cut short by a group of men who ambushed her carriage. The men killed the bodyguards and the maids and burned them. Before harming the queen, they revealed that the first wife had paid for her life, and one of them immediately struck her with a large stick and also lit fire to her, leaving her for dead. But fate intervened, and a palm wine tapper who had witnessed the attack came to her rescue, saving her from death, but the burns from the fire had disfigured her. She told them she was Queen Naomi, the king's lover. The woman's story was met with gasps of shock and horror. The king's face was ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman continued, telling them how she had given birth to twins, a boy and a girl, and how she had been driven out of the community after the death of the palm wine tapper because they believed she was a witch. As the woman finished her story, the crowd erupted into chaos. The first wife, who had been sitting quietly until then, stood up, her face twisted with fear. She tried to sneak away, but she was caught and punished with death. The king, meanwhile, was overcome with emotion, his heart filled with joy and sorrow. He had finally found the love of his life, but she had been through so much suffering. The king's joy was palpable as he gazed at the twins, his children, who stood before him with wide eyes. He knew that he had been given a second chance, a chance to make up for lost time. He vowed to protect and love his children, to provide them with the life they deserved. And as he looked at the woman, his beloved, he knew that he would spend the rest of his life making her happy, trying to make up for the suffering she had endured. The kingdom celebrated long into the night, their joy and relief palpable. The king and his beloved were reunited at last, and their children were by their side. It was a new beginning, a chance for them to start anew, to leave the past behind and forge a brighter future. And as they looked up at the stars, they knew that they would face whatever challenges came their way, together as a family. The priest told the king the following morning that Queen Naomi was afflicted because the kingdom's heir was living outside the land, so the gods allowed the afflictions to reunite the king and the heir. At last, the kingdom had an heir, and the joy of the kingdom was restored, and many communities began to invite the duo on special programs, and Princess Sita later got married to a wealthy prince of another kingdom. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. I love you all.